we are here to bring you everything and anything surrounding Porsche. I'm Mike.
I'm Aaron.
And this is P-Car Talk. Hey, welcome to another episode of P-Car Talk. I'm Mike.
And I'm Aaron.
And we are at Speed Syndicate. We are here in Florida. This is essentially kind of in our backyard, like 15, 20-minute drive from us. So we're blessed to have this. And this young man, Chris Valle, is the owner of Speed Syndicate. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
And lead engineer and does a lot of stuff with a lot of people and has a great race background. And we're going to talk race today. And we're going to talk about experiences and stories and a bunch of fun stuff. So we're excited to have you on because, you know, we always run into you when we're here at going to IMSA or we're at the track, or it's always kind of passing. It's like, hey, what's going on? Oh, you know, it's like with those. And you start to become family with friends, and you've been in the business for so long, and you run into the same people like that too. And you're like, when you don't see them kind of all year long, you're in the shop, you're doing stuff, and then you get back out on the road and you start traveling. You're like, hey, what you been up to? What's going on? Let's grab a beer. Let's do this. But so let's talk a little bit about, okay, so season's kind of opening up as we speak. Let's step into that, and then we'll circle back to your business and exactly what you guys do and how you support race teams and all the stuff, fabrication for even, you know, personal race cars and things like that. So your first race, you were talking a little bit about, when's that happening?
Our first race is going to be in the middle of July. We'll be back to Sebring. Right before this coronavirus happened, we were just about ready to go for the 12 hours of Sebring. It's been about 2 months now that we haven't raced. We've been very busy with, you know, different people's project cars and a lot of amateur racers, we'll say. And basically our business is half of that. It's half is amateur race car guys that do HSR, PCA, and then we do run a full season of IMSA with 2 cars in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. We run the Audi TCR cars currently. But it's been very busy, and we're just about ready to get back for the IMSA season to start. First race is going to be with no spectators, so we'll see how that's going to be.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So,
ghost town essentially.
Yeah, I think it'll be different for sure, but
it'd be almost like an aggressive test day, probably, huh?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's going to be. Basically like having blinders on at the racetrack, where that's kind of how it is anyways, where you're kind of so laser focused on your job, you don't really get a chance to know like how truly busy it is during the 12-hour with all the like people camping and partying and guys dressed up in cow suits and craziness like that, you know.
The madness. Yeah, but that's a good point that you bring up, because from a spectator side, even for us, when we're running around doing the media stuff, our day flies by. So I know the weekend must really fly by for you guys, right? Like, because you're so focused, you're so inundated, and it could go, depending on how the car operates and everything operates, it could be a decent day or it could be a really bad day, right?
Yeah, I mean, they consolidate our race schedules pretty tight. Like, basically we show up and we're practicing on the day we show up, every single race we go to. And then the second day is a practice qualifying, third day we race. So we're like the opening band for the big show, which is the WeatherTech series.
That's a good way to put it, actually. Yeah.
And it's a feeder series for a lot of guys that want to get into WeatherTech series, like in the GTD platform, stuff like that. So you're seeing a lot more nowadays of guys that were going to go to IndyCar and start to realize that it's unbelievably expensive, and are kind of pushing to go into like the TCR platform, like what we're doing. So it's neat in that aspect that 3 years ago it was kind of a gentleman, we'll just say a gentleman driver with a guy that they're paying to be their co-driver, to now a place where there's a lot of younger guys that are bringing some sort of sponsorship, either family or you know, some sort of a personal sponsor, and then running in these cars. And that really comes from the level of teams that have got into TCR in the last couple of years, or IndyCar and road to Indy quality teams. So it's neat. Right now.
You were saying offline too, just for dollar figure, just so people understand that don't have no idea what that series. You were saying like probably at least $600,000 to run a full season minimum, right?
Yeah, $600,000, and that's a no frill season. That's your basic show up to the track with the basic
racing's
crew.
expensive, guys.
Yeah. Tires are expensive, fuel is expensive, people are expensive.
Exactly.
It goes on and on.
Yeah, because I think that's another thing too. There's a lot of support that goes behind that, because there's a lot of prep, for example, that happens at your shop before you even get to the track, and then there's adjustments made at the track too when you're testing as well with the cars, right?
Yeah, and funny enough, like our class, we actually are allowed a little bit more freedom than say like the GS cars, which are the bigger cars, like your Cayman MRs and your Mustang GT4s are really built into like a small performance box where you can only change like sets of springs and alignment settings and things like that, where we're able to change our shocks and revalve them and do a lot of suspension geometry changes and things like that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where the more freedom you have, the more freedom you have to spend money. But at the same time, like it really puts the good teams at the forefront compared to some guys that are just kind of showing up.
That's true.
And that just builds the series and the quality of the series as well.
Is there a horsepower cap on that? Because I don't know.
It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder formula.
Okay.
So basically, we're running about 330 horsepower in about a 2,500 pound car.
Okay.
So they're quick.
Yeah.
In fact,
I know your cars are fast. I've watched your races where you guys qualify and win and all that stuff, and I'm like, those cars are quick, man.
Lime Rock, the TCR car, the fastest TCR car was faster than the fastest GS car. So there's places where the TCR cars are quicker than the bigger horsepower GS cars. I think eventually they're going to slow us down because they can't really speed up the GS cars more. Again, that's just going to cost more money.
I see.
So like most of the cars are built to be inexpensive, and then they restrict them either by horsepower or by weight. So like if a McLaren is racing against a Cayman, clearly a McLaren makes more horsepower. They'll restrict the amount of horsepower that car makes in the racing, or they'll add a bunch of weight, or they'll do both.
Okay.
Each car has their
Just
own
to try
trait.
to balance it out. Yeah.
You know, you can't put a Cayman next to a Mustang and say, well, these cars are identical if you put the same horsepower on them.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, they handle differently too, and everything, and they carry their weight different. Yeah, it's funny because even when I'm not at the race and I see you guys on like TV or IMSA TV or we're watching, I'm like, I know that. I know those cars. Chris, I was like, Chris does those cars. It's kind of cool to see you guys out there. And so let's rewind a little bit. You know, let's talk pre-Race Syndicate, your career as far as like coming up, and let's educate some people on your background and where you came up and some of the drivers you worked with and things like that, and where you spent a lot of your like grinding it out, as they say in the race world, and kind of earning your stripes.
So if we really want to get early on, the reason I got into all this is because one of my best friends bought a Nissan Sentra SER in high school.
I remember those cars, man.
Yeah.
I wanted one, dude.
Well, we built it to do ITS in SCCA, and we took a liking to just being at the track and having, you know, that type of fun. I really have never done anything other than racing, so I don't have like a backstory of I used to do this or I used to do that.
Yeah.
So.
No, I went to a corporate job, I hated it, and then I did this.
No, I started doing this and I haven't stopped. And I did, you know, I briefly went to college for this, but I did do like an automotive program, which I did basically a huge run at like every tech college course you could do, from like machining to welding to like a general automotive associate's degree, which isn't like a engineering degree, but it kind of gives you the basics of all this stuff. And there's two ways of doing this, becoming a race engineer. It's either grinding it out, or you go straight out of school and you become a data guy. But that being said, I did work for Dave White Racing over in Tampa. That was my first race job. And we were kind of like subcontracted to other companies like Salins and stuff like that back in Grand MGT and GS. Did a lot of historic racing. So even though like they kind of hired me to do the newer stuff, which was like the 993s and the 996 were just coming out at that point.
Cool. Okay. That's awesome.
And cup cars and things like that.
That's really cool.
Were just coming out. So I was kind of the guy to do that. But with that said, his bread and butter was air-cooled 911s. I mean, and we had some very fortunate to have such good customers, and we would have like one car racing in each class. So we would have a big bore 3.6 liter air cooled, 911 and down to like a 2 liter car that would race in what was called the Club Sport Challenge back then. So then that kind of pushed me into realizing that I really wanted to go into like a professional racing team. And at that time, we had a customer that went to Orbit Racing, and they were doing Grand Am GT and a lot of ALMS at that time. And again, they also subcontracted some crew guys over to other teams, which you'll find a lot in the smaller, race shops. You'll get like a whole group of their guys that'll go work for like a team like an Alex Job or something like that.
Gotcha.
So then that kind of brings me to like, then I started doing a lot of stuff with Alex Job. That was a really good experience because they were such a big team. And like lots of guys that have been doing it for so long and learned so much from like the engineering staff and the fabrication staff. And I mean, stuff where I didn't realize before that like we would be making our own parts at the track when we find a problem. I mean, we had a full machine shop.
Improvising.
Yeah. Now you can't do that with the homologated cars, but back then, we were not, I wouldn't say the most high tech. We weren't the smartest of any of these teams, but we were the most passionate about winning. Mm-hmm. So we definitely made sure to, any way we could make the cars quicker, we would. Then I did a lot of open wheel stuff, a lot of road to Indy stuff. In between all that, my dad passed away, and I was over kind of floating around in different places, different states, and going to different teams. And my mom's here, and my mom's blind, so I wanted to kind of come back to the St. Pete area. Okay. And just kind of help out, make sure that she was doing okay. And at that time, Anderson Racing opened up, which Dan Anderson owns the Road to Indy. Mm-hmm. They had a team in every single junior Formula series. So I did a year of each different Road to Indy series, from like F2000 all the way to like Indy Lights. Oh, wow. And that's where I started engineering cars. They not only do those Road to Indy programs kind of help out drivers become pro drivers, if you want to build yourself up the ladder as a mechanic or an engineer, and basically I'd wrench the cars in the shop, and then when I get to the track I would help do engineering and whatnot on those. Yeah. Which then got me into a job at USF1, which was a United States based Formula One team that never happened. Mm-hmm. If we were on the open wheel podcast, I'm sure we could probably talk about that for about 2 hours. So I moved up there, and funny enough, that was only like a 6-month deal. Decided that they couldn't afford to do it. And one day I was cold calling a bunch of people just to find a job, because I was sitting in Charlotte with no job, and the season had already started in IMSA and Grand Am, and everybody was full up. So I called a place called Inspire Motorsports, which was being sold actually to a gentleman named John Bennett at that time. And me and Morgan Brady, who actually worked with me at USF1, we created Core Autosport, and I worked for them as a crew chief and engineer for 2 years. Oh, nice. And now they're Porsche GT America. So I left about the time that they did that. And then, with all the inconsistencies in motorsports and the weird stuff that I saw, I kind of thought that it would make sense to start my own business, because at least I would be the, if there any problems occurred, it was gonna be on me, and not on whatever team owner does or doesn't want to race the next year. And through that, I did a little bit more subcontracted stuff and did our performance side. Worked for GMG as a race engineer for 3 years. That kind of got me hooked up with a lot of like the factory Porsche drivers. Like I worked with Lawrence Van Thor, Michael Christensen, Matthew Jimenette, Wolf Henzer. That was like I would say my big break, because we won a ton of races the 3 years that we were there, and Porsche recognized us as like a preferred customer team. Oh, that's cool. I was working with Alex Job at the same time, kind of doing a little bit of a lot of fabrication stuff. mostly on that team while I was engineering for GMG. And in the last few years, we've been basically running our own programs. Like we ran Volt Racing, which now runs Cayman MR. We were running the Mustang at the time. Right now, we run Fast MD Racing. We had a couple smaller stints where we did like half seasons and things like that with a lot of Porsche in smaller, 2-3 races a season type of thing.
Yeah.
But then the other part of our business is we do support a lot of like high-end clientele in PCA and HSR. The reason that we kind of do well in what we do is because I work, so closely with, these IMSA cars and newer cars. When somebody gets a car and they have something that's like a 2-year-old race car, it's generally not that many people that know how to work on these things because they're very techie cars. You know, you can't run them without knowing how to plug into them. And like we'll receive a phone call from Porsche Motorsport North America, and they'll tell us, hey, there's a guy with a GT3R. They don't know where to bring it to. Maybe they'll throw me a bone there. We just had a
makes sense
Cayman MR, like a brand new to us but barely used car come through the shop. So there's a lot of the newer cars that
like cars almost like exiting those series.
Exactly.
And so like you're that stopgap because there, like you said, there isn't a lot of shops that are capable that can pick up that because they're either all in on the new stuff.
Yeah.
And
already moved on.
Yeah. So that's kind of nice that you're able to have that little segue there because there's a ton of those cars.
Yeah.
And there's and they're still great cars and a lot of people still want to run them in a lot of offshoot series, right?
And there, the thing is like we're really blessed right now because if I only had the racing program in IMSA, like we wouldn't be talking. I mean, because we do a lot of track day guys and because we have that relationship with a lot of guys that do PCA track days and Shin and stuff, that
you have a healthy clientele outside of that too. I mean, just from us knowing them too, like obviously not to name names, but like a very healthy clientele who wants to just run those cars that you talked about, an older MR car or something, or a GT3 or something like, or R, something was pretty new but still wants to run it and have fun with it and do their thing with it.
And I think the biggest thing that like separates us from a normal Porsche club racing team is the fact that we do like we do less quantity and we kind of run it as we would an IMSA weekend. Like, which is tough because we probably could be making a lot more money if we were just like banging out cars at the racetrack, but like we have a dedicated data guy. I don't stretch the mechanics too thin. Like there'll be like one car will get 2 mechanics, and that's kind of an unheard of for like GT3 Cup guys and just general IMSA stuff and just general like club racing stuff. It's just it's a different clientele, and a lot of our clientele have raced professionally before as either the gentleman or maybe they were a pro at one point.
That's a good point.
Kind of grew up and then are doing their own thing now. So we treat a PCA or even an SCCA weekend as an IMSA weekend. We're very heavy into the engineering aspect of it. That's our strong point.
And all your clientele, for the most part, are very competitive as well. And I think that it translates because the way you guys approach it and the way they approach it too.
Yeah, I mean, we focus in on, making the driver better because with the gentleman driver, you can engineer yourself crazy on making a car better, but at the end of the day, like them going faster is going to be.
It's still partly them and partly
Yeah, so that's why we're really like heavy on making sure we do like a real debrief, like we would in IMSA. Like the driver gets out of the car, I give them a track map, they write down how the car handled in each turn. And then we look at the data and we discuss where we're going to go next with the car and with the driver. So I try not to overload them, but at the same time, the clientele that I have are the guys that are type A personalities and want to win. So they know that the only reason I'm like telling them this stuff is because they're going to get quicker or they should.
They want to consume more instruction if they can, right? They will be like, give me more. I want to get better. Yeah, that's interesting because even when those races too, when you're doing those, and we've seen when we're at Sebring and it's those weekends or it's an HSR weekend or something like that, and you're there and you're and you're sitting there and you're doing your debriefs with these guys and you're doing, you're going over all this stuff. It also gives you a little bit more intimacy too, because you have the same clientele, so you kind of know their personalities too. Doesn't that kind of help coach them through the car too?
Yeah, and it's good for the business too, because you grow like a real relationship with your customers, where like if you're getting your car serviced at a dealership or like an aftermarket shop, I mean, we're spending like 5-6 hours a day talking. And it's neat because these customers, all of them are incredible at what they do. Like they wouldn't have the ability to do what they're doing unless they had made a lot of money in their businesses.
Yeah, good at whatever their craft is, right?
So it's neat because you learn a lot from these guys, and they all are super nice. Like I haven't had a bad customer in a long time, and if we do, they're typically not around for a long.
Yeah, they're kind of got a fly-by-night type of person. Exactly. They don't hang out long anyways.
Yeah, and like we'll have the same customers for 4, 5, 6 years, until they stop racing. I mean, we typically don't have customers go to other, shops, which is nice. Everybody has a personal relationship with me. Everybody's always texting me or calling me, and it's not the healthiest thing.
No, but I mean,
at the same time, I'm cool with it. So.
Yeah, I think you're passionate about it. Clearly, that's why you wanted to run your own business. But on the flip side of that too, I think that's the unwritten spoken thing when you're running a small business, that customer service where you're reachable, and I think it gives your clientele, because let's face it, a lot of this stuff is very expensive, and at the same time, they want to have a good relationship with you. They don't want the customer client relationship only. They want to have a little bit more of like, hey, I was just thinking this, and it wasn't even like car related. I was thinking about buying one of maybe these and like upgrading eventually and doing this. And what do you think, Chris? And you'd be like, look, we're friends. You don't have the capability to drive that car yet. Like, let's get you sharp in this car first before we start going there. You're not there yet.
Yeah. We're really realistic about that stuff too. It's funny. I know you kind of brought that subject up in another subject. Yeah. We really do try to make sure that people don't get in over their heads. Yeah. Where, it's they see the big machinery that we have here, and I feel like a lot of the times it sways them in their decisions because they think,
they're type A. Yeah, they want to drive the big dog.
I want that.
They see
Nobody wants to
come
in here and wants to be like, not that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying this guys that's listening as a negative thing, but I walk in here, even though I don't spend time on the track, I go gravitate to all the IMSA GT3 cars, and I pass over the spec Boxster car, which I shouldn't, because I can't even drive that car, but I'm going right to the big dog stuff. I'm like, what's this? I want to drive that thing. I want to drive this. And it's like, all right, take it easy, man. Like you're not there yet.
We always try to kind of slow the guys down per se, and kind of get them into something more realistic. And I'll tell you, sometimes it doesn't work, but we try as hard as we can. Some guys, and that's the thing. As long as the guys are driving to their own capabilities, it's kind of okay. Like we had a customer recently that bought a big dog car, and I was very worried about it. And honestly, he drove it to his capabilities, and he gets quicker every weekend. It's not like he goes 5 seconds quicker per session, but as long as you're smart about it,
just slowly dialing it in.
I mean, I'm not a driver. I'll be the first person.
I was going to ask you that. I was like, how much seat time do you spend?
But I drove like our TCR car just a couple weeks ago, and I was really. It was actually a good experience for me because I tell the drivers to do one thing, and then I drove the car myself, and I'm like, you know what? I kind of get where he's coming from with that. I mean, because clearly the guys that are in that car, they know what they're doing. They can drive a car better than me, but I'm just going from like an engineering standpoint and like a data standpoint, and every car drives differently. And these TCR cars are front wheel drive. So the thing about it is you drive it a little bit differently than you would drive a mid-engine car. You trail brake in a lot more. The data traces don't look like it would look like on a different car. So like me telling someone that a squiggly line is the way to drive the car is kind of impossible. So like I got to drive it for a good amount of time, and it really like it woke me up to how you do really have to drive the car versus what
you throttle back a little bit. You're like, this is your mark. Why aren't you hitting your mark? You get it, and you're like, oh, this car will not do that.
Exactly. You're able to go data and then experience.
Exactly.
And, okay.
Why can't you get the car to do this? And you get in, and you're like, this is why you can't get the car to do this.
Yeah. It's weird because you're holding the brake, 50% longer than you would typically in a normal, rear engine, rear wheel drive car. So looking at like, one drive, and like some of the guys get in there and I look at their data and they'll be from another type of car and I'm like, damn, that looks really good. And the times won't be there. And then we'll get the other driver in the car and I'll be like, man, this looks really bad. The brake trace, this looks really sloppy. The throttle is like really inconsistent. And the guy will be like a second and a half quicker. I mean, and we're working in like tenths of a second here with like IMSA,
And you're like, he's quick.
Yeah. 0.2 of a second could be the difference between like first place and eighth place at some tracks here. So it's
crazy.
It's neat that I got to drive a little bit.
I thought those were quattro cars.
Yeah, no, they're all. So that's the other thing about the TCR classes. They're all front wheel drive.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're all front wheel drive, and that's the weird thing.
I'm just looking at that car, assuming it's an all wheel drive car.
That's the weird thing that I see now. The guys that go from like the road to Indy into these cars, it's the reason they go into those TCR cars is, I would say, strictly budget, price wise. Because we talked about like $600,000 for a ride, but you're splitting that.
Yeah.
Like the road to Indy stuff right now, to do like a Indy Lights car, it's like $1.2 million to run in a car that's not really getting any TV time. You're not really getting much like as far as business to business. To ask $1.2 million to do that, that's pretty tough. And even like the F2000, like the kids that go from go-karts into their first step into IndyCar, those cars are $450,000 and you don't own the car.
Wow.
That's how much a kid spends nowadays to just get to the first step of the ladder to the road to Indy.
So you could see why, like if there's not even if somebody's quick and they can't get funding, why maybe people just fall off. You just expect people to go and they're like, well, there's a big budget wall they have to climb too.
It's a sidestep going to TCR. I mean, if everybody has a longer career in sports cars, that's just a given. That's why you see like a Sebastian Bourdais go from IndyCar to racing in an LMP1 car.
Yeah.
Just in general, you could be driving for 20 years in a sports car. And you can in IndyCar, but you got to be like a Scott Dixon or Will Power. It just doesn't happen every day, It's like,
what's his name? It was driving Formula One that was racing with BMW last season, Alonso. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, and he kind of like, he can race IMSA and GTE in his sleep, basically. Like,
I mean, those guys get a chance to, in sports cars, race till they're slow. I mean, that's it. I mean, and even a guy that's like lost a little bit of pace can be known as like a really consistent driver. And that's the thing, is a lot of these times you're doing 4 drivers in a race like at Daytona.
And you need a guy like that on the team, right? Like, because we've talked to team builders essentially, like when you're scouting a team, even like with Porsche, when you're scouting a team, it's not necessarily you're putting everybody would think exterior wise the 4 fastest guys together. That's not the case. Sometimes there just has to be a good team mesh first, and where they know each other well enough and they know each other's driving style, and it's like it's like I have a guy to go after it, and then I have a guy I know it's going to put down consistent lap times, it's going to take care of the car. Like that, and you
think about that when you're doing strategy, where you're going to place driver at set time. There's guys that have better night vision, that are quicker in the night. There's guys that you want to finish a race, and then there's guys that you want to like make sure that they're just basically keeping the pace and keeping the car consistent. And there's guys that are really good at diagnosing the car, and that's something like you might not think about at the start of a 24-hour race. Is that sometimes you want to have the guy that's the best at setup start the race.
That's a good point.
Because
you get longevity out of it.
You get a yellow, you can make a change.
Yeah, you can get it dialed in right off the bat.
I mean, the nighttime is so different from the daytime. But at the end of the day, like if you're constantly making the car better throughout the 24, you can have a car that wasn't maybe able to win at the start that could put down some good laps at the end and possibly go for it. And then by the time that thing's dialed in, you might have your youngest, most aggressive guy finish the race.
Yeah,
it's a weird scenario. Like there's a lot of things that you just don't think of until you've experienced it, but like once you do a race like that, you start to think about like, well, how would I do it differently?
Yeah. How do I make this better?
And like Michelin Pilot Challenge, like right now, they're only 2-hour races and 4-hour races. Mm-hmm. So it's a given that you're always going to start the slower of the two drivers. I'll just be frank about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could bullshit it, but
no.
We got two really good drivers in our car right now in the 23, and I can't say anything bad about either of them.
Yeah.
But you have one that's a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
And if one was quicker at a different track, maybe somebody, is from Connecticut and they're at Lime Rock all the time, I'll swap them. That's not a problem.
Exactly.
But you want to have your fastest guy in the car for the longest amount of time.
Of course.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah, I was going to say that's pretty basic because they're going to put down the most laps and they're going to gain the most ground, obviously.
And I was talking about this yesterday. I really wish that IMSA would give points for qualifying because that might make it less of a cookie cutter race.
That's true.
Because if you had your faster guy qualifying, say there's 5 points for qualifying, that would make a big difference at the end of the year.
Because people would chase qualifying a little bit better instead of just being like, whatever.
Yeah. You might have a guy. I mean, there's teams out there in GS. TCR is stacked. It's all good drivers. But there's some guys in GS that are also ran guys that might be 3 seconds slower than their pro in the car. Mm-hmm. And if that was flipped around, it might make sense to qualify your pro. And then, our cars do about 50 minutes on fuel, and it's a 2-hour race.
Yeah.
They do that on purpose.
Yeah.
So they're making some sort of a strategy.
Yeah, like,
because our car.
When are you going to take it?
Exactly. And then, do you pit and do your driver change first? Do you run that drive a little bit further? Do you conserve fuel at the start and try to make it like an hour, 10 minutes? Because it's possible. We won Road America 3 years ago with the Mustang, and all we did was conserve fuel the whole time. Okay. We weren't the outright fastest car, but
you were out there the longest, probably.
We were out there the longest, and we were the only people to pit on the first early pit stop and get our fueling done. And then we knew that it was going to be a long run, so we basically just told them on the dash, it says you're using 3 liters a lap. You're going to have to run to 2.7. And it's going to be slower. Uh-huh. But good drivers know how to lift and coast and do all these things to try to make fuel per se. My air quotes. Exactly. I guess no one's seeing my air quotes right now. So making fuel is basically the guys lifting a little bit earlier, then braking, say with the right.
So you're looking for a Prius driver, essentially, somebody who is hypermiling. Yes. He's like, you know how to hypermile?
There you go.
We need you to race for us.
If they have a Prius, that's going to be your closing driver. So it's different. There's a lot of different ways to win a race, and it's not always the fastest car. Yeah. It sometimes goes down to just a strategy.
Maybe you could lead, we've talked and we've been at the track a lot, but we've never really talked to anybody about this specifically. And I think it's an interesting topic. So with qualifying in all classes, essentially, there's a little bit of sandbagging that goes on, right? You don't want to be too strong of a car because you might get turned down and they might turn somebody up. Can you speak to that at all? Because we've heard that a lot between a lot of teams where people are like, well, you don't want to go too strong because then they're going to turn your car down. And
so we're an Audi customer team, which means that we're always talking to the engineering staff and the operations manager about that type of stuff. And with Audi, they don't tell us to go slow. Mm-hmm. There's been times where we knew we were really quick and we might have slowed ourselves down a little bit, and not really to be lying or doing anything deceitful, but
or strategy involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to get.
You don't want to show all your cards,
they're not going to penalize you in the middle of the weekend. They won't penalize you in the middle of the weekend in our class. It's just too quick of a weekend for us. So.
Do you see that in the bigger cars, though?
I see that in GTD all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, GTD 100%.
Okay.
They're doing that.
So there's some strategy behind that, too, because if the car's really dialed up, they may hold back a little bit in qualifying for that exact reason, right?
But here's the thing. You'll like this. Okay. So 3 years ago, I went to a meeting that IMSA put on that was all about BOP.
Okay.
Okay. So IMSA every session takes a data card from our car, and they download all of our data, and there's let's call it 12 sectors in each track.
Okay.
They take every one of these sectors and design basically a map of who's fast in which sections. If you're blindingly fast in the banking at Daytona, you clearly have too much horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
If you're blindingly fast in the infield at Daytona, you clearly could use a little bit of weight. So they kind of dictate a lot of this stuff by where you are quick.
Okay.
So they're not going to take like a Cayman and look at them on the banking and see that they're the 10th fastest manufacturer and then restrict their horsepower. But that's not to say that they make the same lap time as McLaren. Those are two very specific cars because those are two cars that make time in two totally different places.
Yeah.
And I've ran both of those cars, so it's kind of a good,
Gotcha.
a good example. So it's not like they're playing favoritism.
Okay.
But when you get into something where, say there's one Cayman being ran in IMSA right now, in Michelin Pilot Challenge, that car may have a slow driver in it. That car may not be engineered as good as if another team did it, or that car could have sustained damage during the race. And they look at race pace, they look at qualifying pace. If your splitter's hanging off the car and you were good once in the infield and now you're not, you can then say, well, look at how bad our car is in the infield. But the splitter's hanging off the car, or the rear wings cracked, or they have some sort of underlying problem. They blew up the tire pressure too much because the kid doing the tires did the wrong pressure. I mean, there's just so many different ways that they can look at it. So that's where like the political portion of it is, but they're always looking at the data. Okay. So you have each manufacturer has a representative for your car. That's kind of playing the political game, and each and then IMSA has their data, which is purely derived from, how fast the car is in certain sectors, top speeds. And they've actually dumbed that down where the teams can't see as many sectors because the teams were knowing too much. So they've now made each track have 3 sectors.
Okay.
But on their information that they're getting, it's like 12, 16 sectors, something like that.
Yeah, it's more broken down.
Yeah. So we have like on the track, every good team has like some sort of a strategy software that's plugged into IMSA's computer stuff.
Okay.
You can see Tech 7, they're computer stuff.
Yeah.
So you plug it into an Ethernet port and you get data coming out.
Gotcha.
So basically it's telling you what every car is doing for lap time, where they are on track, when they pitted last, how long they were in the pits. So you can kind of build up like some information base of like how. And the other thing is like
loose guessing. You're like, all right, car 63 is going to need fuel soon.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is like it's great for us guys. Like I call the strategy and I do the engineering on these cars, so it's a lot of work. And just to have it clearly in front of you is really nice.
Instead of hunting it all.
Yeah, or having like because I have
back in the day, you got Jackie X out there, like,
like that was the driver's wife, driver's wives and girlfriends.
Yeah, exactly, on the watch.
Yeah, so it's a lot. It's a lot more advanced than you kind of think. Like when people are like, "Oh, damn, the BMW is fast this weekend." It's
and I think
there for a reason.
I think that's that's a good point you bring that up, because I think unless you're in a deep dive, unlike a lot of us that are into the track and speaking to guys with like you on an often basis and getting that knowledge, if you're an outside watcher and you don't know all that data, you don't really know why things are happening the way they're happening. You're like, why was the Ferrari so fast at Petit Le Mans? Because they turned up the boost on it. You know what I mean? Like,
and look, they're not always right, but they're never doing it for the wrong reasons. And like we actually get a lot from the WTCR series over in Europe. It's like a lot of our BOP and a lot of our homologated parts, like everything's done over in Europe. So like IMSA is kind of like a second party to all this.
Okay.
Like for our cars, because
So it's already kind of like laid out already.
Yeah, but I mean, like we got a bunch of weight taken off for Daytona, and I'll be honest with you, I felt kind of surprised. Like I was expecting no changes for the Audi, and we had weight taken off, and I was like, man. And I think a lot of that was because other teams were sandbagging.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a here you go.
Yeah.
Because I'm always watching what other teams are doing, and that's given me I've been able to do this finally for the first time like the last couple of years, because I have such strong team. I've got really good engineers that are with me and stuff like that. And sometimes I'll just walk.
Yeah.
I'll walk to Michelin, and I'll look at their tires. I'll go over and look at like what Brian Herta has on the front of their car, and I'll just be like, wow. And I'll see something, and I'll be like, well, that's not exactly legal. and at the Roar at Daytona, which is basically your practice before the race weekend, they look at the data really in depth there. With our cars, we don't have to go there, but there's always has to be one car from that manufacturer there. It's mandatory for anything in WeatherTech. Okay. They have to go to that race, or that practice. So with some of the teams, especially some of the guys that might be coming from like we had an influx of road to Indy teams in TCR.
Okay.
They don't have that experience of knowing that like they're gonna catch you. Because that meeting was 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
It just so happens that I was there at that meeting, but there's a lot of new teams that are in that series that weren't at that meeting.
That's a good point.
So they don't think of like, oh well, okay, I'm just gonna sandbag. We're gonna lift. We're gonna hit the brakes really, really hard and go really slow into the bus stop.
Uh-huh.
That'll slow down our speed into the banking with turn 4. So there's a lot of ways of like cutting it where you can slow down the car, but they know this.
Yeah.
And then
they're looking at the data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just like, it's just a matter of time, dude,
Yeah.
until they like find out.
yeah, a couple years ago, Lamborghini did that, and they got penalized. All the teams got penalized
Yeah.
at the actual race
Wow.
because they sandbagged really bad.
Yeah, did
like
they?
full lifts and bad stuff like that. Yeah.
So when you're taking weight out of the car, like in the Audis, where's the weight at? Where's it kept? Or is it different for everybody?
It's different for everybody.
Okay. All right. Well, then you don't need to go there.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I can go
So
there.
what's
a little
the
bit.
treats
So
again?
Yeah, I'm not trying to like.
no, I mean
it was just so people understand that,
Yeah.
like that don't know, where they're saying like, oh well,
I was
we're
wondering
taking
that
weight
same
out.
thing.
It's like,
Yeah.
is it like the weight room? Like when you're in the gym, you just take a 45-pound plate out of the car and
basically,
you're like, here we go.
So like they have homologated places where you're supposed to put the weight, and they have rules that kind of grandfathered in per se. So that might be something that we look at.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
the homologated weight place and the place that the weight might be two separate places.
Okay.
Especially on a very front heavy car like that. But
Yeah, I was gonna say you want to try to balance that out as much as you can.
So you want the weight as low as possible, obviously, and you want it to the center as much as possible. But with the homologated weight plate system, like you basically are putting it where the passenger seat is, but then we kind of manipulate it just to get it as far over to the center of the car as possible, but
As
still
balanced
being
as possible
on the passenger
Okay.
side.
Gotcha.
And then we make any additional weight plate very flat, very low. We're using steel. There's tungsten that people use, but you're talking big money,
Yeah.
LMP1 type of money and GTLM money.
Yeah.
So we're using steel plates, and we've made it so you could you just got a big threaded rod. You could stack them, and that's
Okay.
custom for us. It's not from an Audi thing.
Yeah.
So we can move the weight around to kind of change the balance of the car. The back end of the car is obviously really light, so we try to work on that as much as possible. But we can't put that there in a homologated fashion, so we're not putting like big weight plates like we would for the homologated weight.
Okay.
So the car is the Audi is underweight, and
So when they come to you and like at Daytona, for example, they're like, hey, take the weight out of the car. Like, how much weight did you take out? Like, is it more now a guessing game where you're kind of like you're pretty close to that weight? Are you spot on to that
we're
weight?
spot on to that weight.
Okay.
Okay. So we're not spot on to that weight. The smart way of doing it is giving yourself a little bit of leeway,
Cushion, right? So you don't get penalized during tech or something like that.
They work in kilos, so we're typically like 3 kilos over from what the actual weight is supposed to be. Because
kilos, huh?
yeah, so IMSA.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, everything like we took
South
out.
Florida, yeah, take a couple kilos out. It's like, whoa,
Just
hang
take
on
it out
a
of the
minute.
motor.
Hang
I heard
on
some
a minute.
stories.
Exactly.
Old Porsche
Take a
stuff.
secret compartment.
Yeah,
Take
yeah.
3 kilos out of the car. You're like, what?
Well, luckily we know some guys. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're like we're moving stuff around, and we'll get it about 3 kilograms to where we need to be. You never.
It's almost
know.
like going to the deli. Yeah, it's close enough.
Yeah. Yeah, but they'll usually tell us a week before, which honestly kind of sucks for some teams that are in California and things like that, because their cars might be on the way to
traveling
track.
and all
Yeah.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's on the carrier on the way there.
Yeah, we've had to take like 40 kilos out of a car before. I mean, that's a shitload of weight.
I was gonna say that's a lot.
I mean, that's a lot.
That's a
like
lot of bricks.
present.
That's a lot of bricks.
Yeah, man, that's a Colombian Bam Bam there.
Exactly. He's like, man, the car's really light.
Yeah, that was like the only race I think we made money. It's weird.
Exactly. I don't know how that works.
I don't know where all those kilos
how
went.
does that work? That's hilarious. Yeah, but I think a lot of people don't realize that too. That don't get into the full deep dive. You know, that maybe the occasional race weekend, see some of the race. They're like, oh, wait a minute, they're taking weight out of the car sometimes. They're adding more power. They're taking power out of the car. Like,
that's kind of the cool thing with our like amateur clients is like they are always calling me. They're always watching the races. They're all fans. I mean, clearly you don't get into like race car driving if you're not a fan of racing to begin with. So like
stumbling into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This looks like something I'd like to do.
Yeah, it's not something you sit around that you're super wealthy and you're having your iced tea in the bed. You're like, I'm gonna get into racing.
I figured I would do this really expensive money pit real quick.
I'm gonna go burn 600 real fast.
Yeah. So they get the education with running with us. It's kind of neat. Like when I get like our customers like, oh man, you guys did great in qualifying, or oh I'm sorry that car hit you and that's fucked up. And
exactly.
I get all.
Well, that's how I am even like with you guys. I watch your race because of you, because we're friends with you. So it's like, hey, when you do good, especially when we saw you like petite, you guys are celebrating. I was like, hey, what's going on, man?
Just came from last a second, no big deal.
He's like, well, I gotta be at Sebring tomorrow. I was like, we're in Atlanta right now. You're like, yeah, I know, I'm about to leave. And I'm like, jeez.
That is the biggest. Like with me, I'm so strung tight, man. I got so many things going on at all times. But it's good. I got a good support system.
I think you got to. I honestly, you have to hustle, and I think. And it goes to any side of business. If you have to be hustling to like make it right, I guess, to make it a good business, you have to. If you just sat around and like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I mean, you would lose clients. You can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, shoot, we probably do. Well, we're in May right now. I've probably been at the racetrack 20 weekends.
Yeah,
I would say,
exactly.
or 20 days at least. Sorry,
exactly
20 days.
And then not to mention all the prep and travel time to get to those as well. So that's just being present. Yeah. And for everybody who's listening, we have been trying to track Chris down for like over a year. So this is actually a real treat that we're actually able to get him on the show because he is so busy.
Well, you could have just gone to Sebring any week and it would have been there. So.
Yeah. But I mean, again, like it's for us too. We're fans, and I know you're working. So there's also a thing where I know you're. Just like with the guys that are there too. Yeah. Like there's certain people where we talked about, you're like, try to grab them at the track.
Yeah.
And it's, well, I want to respect their time too, because they're there to have fun, but they want to compete. So their mind is in a certain different mindset. So from our perspective, we're trying to respect that too, where we're not like, hey man, I know you don't have anything going on. You just got out of the car. Like you want to like pop on, and they're just not going to be like in that mindset to come on the show and like have like we're having a casual conversation where you're relaxed and you're hanging out.
Yeah, adrenaline might be going a little bit.
Yeah,
exactly.
We've I don't think you could have ever sat me down for like more than 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and maybe the best if you even get a chance. I think if at all, it might be an HSR weekend that you're there because there's maybe a little bit of like. Well, I'm just saying like of all the races, like that would be the one where you're just not 100% always like,
I don't know though. It's a little bit different because at the IMSA events, I feel less obligated to do everything.
Oh, okay.
Because I have such good team.
Better team.
I mean, because at an HSR event, I'm typically like the data guy, the crew chief, the team manager.
That's true. I didn't think about that because actually there's less staff for you there because you don't have like a bunch of fly-ins or anything like that with you there.
Yeah, I mean, it's still good staff, but
and
like
you're still running
can't...
probably like 3 cars
at
HSR typically.
And we don't, it's a different budget. It's a totally different budget too. I mean, like, a guy doing an HSR event is not going to spend nearly as much as like an IMSA weekend. I mean, the IMSA weekends are, well, they're $60,000 a weekend.
Exactly.
I mean, and most of that is in, flights and crew and
lodging, and
lots of
everything.
people. It takes 9 people to do an event, and that's just because of like the pit stops. I don't necessarily feel like we need 9 people to run the program smoothly, but when it gets down to like doing the pit stops, you got to have a guy doing fire bottle. You have to have a guy fueling the car. You have to have a guy doing front tires, rear tires.
Better to have somebody everywhere.
Exactly. You don't want to have one guy trying to do 2 jobs out there. He's doing fuel and fire extinguisher. You're like, this doesn't really work.
I didn't pull the pin. Oh.
You're like, wait a minute. He's got like the fire extinguisher on his back as he's filling stuff up. Hang on.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of that changed though after all this.
Yeah.
Because I really would like to see, like it's a huge part of our budget is just the amount of crew.
Yeah,
and
staff.
I did get an email just recently from IMSA asking,
can you train me to do something on the car? I can.
Yeah, shit. You can hold a stick and go like that. There you go. That's a job. So that's a thing.
Stick guy.
Like literally holding a lollipop, like the signboard. We have to have someone do that.
I'll do it for free. How's that sound? That saves you money right there because I'll be there already. So you just let me be down there and hold it. How's that sound?
But they used to have a jackman, right? For in Michelin Pilot Challenge. They used to have a guy that jumped the wall and would jack the car. And then you would have your 2 tire guys. So they decided to put air jacks in all the
I was just about to say, I was like, that probably went away with air jacks.
Okay, so that happened. And air jacks went on the car, and then no team has less people. In fact,
that guy just does something else now.
Yeah. I'm the worst because we've kind of found a small loophole in the pit stop where all you have to do is break the plane of the wall to be the person.
Okay.
So like I'll put the helmet on and get all my suit on and I jump over the wall and I wand the car up and then it lifts the car in the air and then I jump directly back over the wall, and that's because a lot of the times we only do front tires because it's a front wheel drive car.
Yeah.
So I jump the wall, plug in the air wand, car goes up, I jump, break the plane of the wall. So there's only 3 people that are allowed in the pit stop. So the outside tire guy goes out when I jump the wall because that's the farthest run.
Gotcha.
Why would you have a guy that has to plug in a wand and then run in the back of the car?
Yeah.
So I should probably specify that. The wand is in the back of the car.
Exactly.
And we're only changing the front tires. So if the guy that was changing the tires wanted would then have to run back, all the way. And then we have a fueler that's also fueling in that vicinity. Mm-hmm. So like I jump, I put the wand in, and then the guy goes to the outside before I jump. And then when I jump and break the plane of the wall, the inside guy goes in and he starts changing the tire.
Yeah.
Whatever tire guy is done first runs as fast as he can, jumps the plane of the wall. I jump back to the air wand.
Okay.
And then I pull the wand because typically, if you're doing this smart, your tires and your fuel, you try to get it about at the same time. Yeah. So like if it takes
the car basically just airs down and goes.
Because it takes like 53 seconds. That's a mandated IMSA thing. That's another thing. IMSA now doesn't tell you what restrictor you need to run for fueling. They just tell you need to fuel for 53 seconds. Yeah. But I only in a 4-hour race will I ever, fuel for 53 seconds. And that might not even happen. So like we typically try to make it so when we're fueling the car, we're doing the same amount of time as what it takes to do the tires. Because why would you want to sit there and just fuel the car?
Well, I was going to say burn fuel too, right? Yeah. I know it's idle, but the car's running.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of these things like a lot of little tricks. And,
but you do see teams like that where the team will finish with those drivers just sitting there with 10 seconds. Yeah, and most people I'm glad you brought that up because they're like, why are they just sitting there? Because I have to. Yeah,
and then the other thing is a lot of cars will finish with, not 20, like 10 gallons in the tank. they'll finish a race with that. I mean, that's weight.
That's
like,
way too much.
And that's the type of stuff we do in the shop here is like we time the fuel.
Should be on fumes. When
Yeah,
you're, like,
exactly.
done.
You know, you should have like 3-4 gallons in it when it ends. So, you know, that's extra time in the pits and that's extra weight you're carrying around the car. So you made the car slower and you made your pit stop longer. So like these are the things that we're constantly thinking about to try to make our race.
But all of those little things add up to those tenths that you were speaking about earlier because it does come down to tenths.
Well, it does in the race, but it doesn't in the pits.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's true.
That, you know,
But I'm saying with the weight in the car, like you don't need to carry that because that could be tenths.
But we're, you know, if you're out of the pits 10 seconds before everybody else because you've done this in the shop 20 times, 30 times, and you're thinking about, and you know how much fuel the thing uses per second and how much fuel it's going to use in that 50 minutes that it needs to run, you might gain, you know, the whole field. Yeah. I mean, we were in dead last at...
Is there ever talks about like maybe having where they'll change the rules of that or you think that's always going to be mandated 53 seconds where they would change it to say if you had a good pit crew, maybe that is an advantage for your team?
53 is what they want a full fuel load to be. So like if you came in and your car had 0 fuel in it and your car took 19.75 gallons or so. Yeah. We'll go back into liters. So it's we do 76 liters. So if you was 0 and you filled it 76 liters, and it has to take 53 seconds. Okay. You don't have to sit there. Yeah. So that's where the gain is. Gotcha. So like if you don't need to take 53 seconds worth of fuel, you don't sit there.
I see. Okay, I see what you're saying.
So like in World Challenge or Blah Punt GT, they just changed from this, but they always had a mandatory pit stop time where you would have to sit in the pits for like 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know. So like some they even do that like at Nürburgring and stuff like that too, where there's like you're just sitting there and you're like cars ready to go and everybody's ready to go.
Yeah. So with IMSA,
and they're just hold the stick man. Yeah, which would be me. Stick man's still holding the thing like I'm getting tired.
the cool thing about IMSA is it does benefit a lot. Like you benefit a lot from strategy. Where in Europe and kind of the Blah Punt GT and SRO stuff, you don't gain as much by doing strategy or being very in depth into like the time you do your fuel and when you do it, how much you do it, because like in Europe these the full course cautions that they do, like the code 60s where they're driving around and going 60 kilometers an hour, that's kind of like beneficial to a very fast race car. So you can race, your race pace is more important than your strategy sometimes in IMSA. Okay. When you're at just about to get lapped by the lead car in your class, if it goes yellow, you then basically get to gain the whole track back. Yeah. So like when it goes yellow, you get to then go all the way to the back of your pack, and then not being almost lapped car.
You're like, stay on the lead lap. Yeah, so that's all that. Don't get lapped.
In a code 60 at like Le Mans or any of these other, like Nürburgring 24, like those, you don't benefit from that at all. Like, and then when you pit and it has to take 2 minutes anyways, I get where that comes from because it is a cost cap thing, because then you only have to have truly 3 guys doing a pit stop. Mm-hmm. One guy with a gun, guys fueling it, stuff like that.
Yeah, because then they can get it all done in that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's beneficial, but at the same time, to me, it's not as much a race.
I was going to say, it seems less racing, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's kind of the cool part about Grand Am, turning in IMSA, like merging, and basically NASCAR and IMSA kind of taking the best of both of their series and like combining it. Mm-hmm. Because, Grand Am was really it's kind of, you got a NASCAR feel from it. It's rough and tumble, you get it done. And then IMSA had that, refined, European feel to it. And they blended it well when they made the merger. So, I mean, it is
going to be, that's cool.
It is cool the way it is. I liked the way that American Le Mans used to have the pit stops where you would fuel and then do your tire stop, because it made your tire stop such a big deal. Yeah. Like it was really cool back then. I mean, they had competitions for pit stops and tire change, stuff like that.
Like that stuff's cool. I think that's part of the race. Like I think that's part of like it's more of a team, I guess. When it's like
it makes it a team sport.
Yeah,
more so than just a driver driving a car.
Exactly. Instead of guys just like servicing his car essentially.
And coming from it hasn't changed so much like as an engineer, but when it comes to like the crew guys, I noticed when a mechanic goes and does an SRO race, they don't feel as involved as they do in an IMSA race because they're doing a true full speed pit stop.
Yeah.
And it's glory. If those guys knock out a good pit stop, they're high-fiving each other.
Of course, they are amped up. You see them when they're like that was awesome. Or then somebody, and then there's also a fail too because they're like you didn't put the center lug on tight enough and the wheels falling off quarter mile down the track and they're like. Guy loses the entire lap and has to like come back in and it's like, oh my God, that guy's fired.
And there's a skill. There's a skill to that. It's not just like in 2 minutes anybody can get it done.
Yeah.
You can have the most athletic guy, the least athletic guy. And you look at like NASCAR and Formula One, they've got sporting directors that are making sure that these guys are working out every single day.
And they practice religiously. Yeah. Like their times are a huge difference in their races. If they're a crappy pit team, their car suffers.
Yeah, and it's not a cool thing about the whole say coronavirus thing is like in the time that we haven't been racing, we've been lucky enough to have enough work where I can bring down like a lot of the guys that are on the race team. And we have done a good amount of testing. We have done a lot of like things like pit stop practices and things of that sort that would, benefit us going into this first race coming off of this, pandemic.
And you got to try to stay sharp too. That's another thing. And it's nice that you have been able to do that because I'm sure there's other teams that don't get to do that.
I would say 75% of the teams. I know guys that work at Porsche GT and they're just going back to work today or yesterday they went back to work. So
that's nuts.
It's kind of crazy. Like it really has changed motorsport a lot, and I don't know what it's gonna be like when we get back. I know we're not gonna have any spectators. We're gonna have to do some stuff that follows in the CDC guidelines. So we're gonna have not only our technical and our sporting regulations, we're also gonna have a CDC guideline, regulations where I'm guessing we're going to have to be wearing, masks.
Yeah.
I think what they're going to try to do is create.
You guys all just wear helmets.
Yeah. What's funny is I was thinking I'm going to do a helmet
just
instead
wear a helmet
the whole time.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to do cells now. Like they're going to basically break it into quadrants.
Yeah.
Where people don't contaminate as many people. So one guy doesn't go to quadrant 4. And, they talked about that in the SRO stuff. I don't know what they're going to do with IMSA, but I feel like the watching NASCAR races, NASCAR owns IMSA, so it's going to be kind of the baseline, the map of what they do, which is good because at least that big company, our sister company or really our father company.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to know how to run a race before we get back to running a race.
That's true.
So
they'll have the blueprint down where it's like this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and that's cool. So hopefully we have as many teams as we did at Daytona because in our class, at least in Michelin Pilot Challenge and TCR and GS, that class is growing leaps and bounds. GTD's a little bit struggling, but I think that has to do with kind of a restructure in cars and whatnot. There'll be some new cars coming out soon and some Evo kits and it is just getting so expensive.
Yeah. A question I'd like to ask you is since you're in that world, the up and coming hypercar class that's being introduced. What are your thoughts behind that? Is that going to be an interesting thing? Do you think it's kind of
I'm very biased in this.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of PCAR Talk. Connect with us on Instagram at PCAR Talk or online at PCARTalk.com.